killer neighbors, private eyes, and one crazy fear of heights, Hollywood loves thrillers, but Metacritic only truly loves a handful. Alfonso Cuarón won the award for Best Achievement in Directing for his 2013 space set thriller Gravity, which he also co-wrote and co-edited. Sandra Bullock stars as astronaut Dr. Ryan Stone, a medical engineer and mission specialist desperately trying to find a way back to Earth following the destruction of her shuttle during her first space mission. As far as thrillers go, it's more on the contemplative side, but don't let that fool you. Gravity is a real nail-biter in places, made all the more memorable thanks to stunning visuals and two gripping performances. It's not totally true to life, but real-life astronauts have praised Gravity for its accuracy. Former NASA astronaut Michael J. Massimino told Space Safety magazine, "There was a one-of-a-kind wire cutter we used on one of my spacewalks, and sure enough, they had that wire cutter in the movie." Buzz Aldrin also remarked on the realism in a review he penned for The Hollywood Reporter, saying, "I was so extravagantly impressed by the portrayal of the reality of zero gravity."
Let's go home.
Bong Joon-ho's Parasite made history in 2020 when it became the first non-English language film to win the Oscar for Best Picture. This dark comedy thriller follows the Kims, a poor family whose members gradually integrate themselves with the wealthy Park family, infiltrating their home and their lives in the process. It begins when Kim Ki-woo gets a job teaching Park Da-hae English using a forged certificate. Ki-woo goes on to secure jobs in the household for the other members of his family by lying about their experience, with the Kims keeping the fact that they were related a secret from the Parks. Parasite has a score of 97 on Metacritic, as well as a near-perfect rating on Rotten Tomatoes, where it's certified fresh with a rating of 99%. The general consensus among critics is that Bong Joon-ho's thriller is nothing short of a masterpiece, one that stays with you long after the credits have rolled. The Financial Times review read in part, "It's a film that always has two thoughts in his head at once. A spectacular epic and tightly wound chamber piece, chicly sophisticated, brutal as a hammer." Described as ferociously suspenseful by the New York Times and a near-perfect movie by Time magazine, it's no exaggeration to say that Kathryn Bigelow's The Hurt Locker is one of the best war movies of all time. It follows an explosive ordnance disposal team during the second year of the Iraq War, as Jeremy Renner's Sergeant First Class William James takes charge of the team following the previous leader's death. The tension builds and builds as the team disarms bombs and comes under sniper fire. What sets The Hurt Locker apart from similarly themed movies made during this period is that it toes the line between Hollywood thriller and gritty Iraq War realism perfectly, refusing to shy away from the lead character's motives while still being endlessly entertaining. Time Out's review for the movie commented, "Bigelow's film combines an expert management of tension with a sensitive and journalistic attention to detail. She has one eye on the truth and the other on the multiplex."
What's the best way to go about disarming one of these things?
The way you don't die, sir.
Another tightly wound war thriller from Kathryn Bigelow, 2012's Zero Dark 30 is a dramatization of the hunt of Osama bin Laden. Jessica Chastain stars as a CIA intelligence analyst named Maya, who is in charge of the manhunt for the Al-Qaeda leader. The film spans a decade between the 9/11 attacks and Operation Neptune Spear, in which a SEAL Team 6 task force shot and killed bin Laden after raiding his compound in Pakistan. This film came with its fair share of controversy, mainly for the way it depicts torture as a necessary evil. Zero Dark 30 also contains some historical inaccuracies and factual errors. There's no getting around these failures on the part of the filmmakers, but when judging Zero Dark 30 purely as a cinematic experience, it's absolutely riveting. The term thrill ride is overused in reviews, but rarely has it been more apt. As Owen Gleiberman wrote for Entertainment Weekly, "Once in a long while, a fresh-from-the-headlines movie fuses journalism, procedural high drama, and the oxygenated atmosphere of a thriller into a new version of history written with lightning." The third feature film from Martin Scorsese, 1973's Mean Streets, is the story of two young men living in the Little Italy neighborhood of New York City. Charlie Kappa is a devout Catholic struggling to reconcile the work he did for his mafia boss uncle with his religion. His life is complicated further by the reckless behavior of his friend Johnny Boy Savello, who owes money to some dangerous loan sharks and doesn't seem to care about the repercussions of not paying it back.
What do you come out going shopping when you owe somebody money, Johnny? That ain't right. What are you talking about? You got
Charlie, I'm gonna pay him next week. I'm gonna pay you.
You're going. You don't do nothing.
Part crime thriller and part character study, Mean Streets is a raw, edge-of-your-seat movie that will punch you in the gut in some unexpected ways. It's a film that puts Scorsese on the map, leading to one of the most impressive careers in Hollywood history. Writing for The New Yorker when the film first hit cineplexes, iconic critic Pauline Kael said, "Mean Streets is a true original of our period, a triumph of personal filmmaking." Based on a 1971 short story by Daphne du Maurier, the 1973 psychological thriller film Don't Look Now stars Donald Sutherland and Judy Christie as a married couple who moved to Venice following the death of their daughter. Sutherland's John Baxter has been hired to restore a church in the famous Italian city, but things start getting weird after the couple encounters a seemingly clairvoyant woman who claims to have a message from their deceased daughter. It's not long before John starts seeing things that he can't explain. Don't Look Now was released to generally positive reviews at the time, but it took a while for people to recognize Nicholas Roeg's terrifying thriller for what it is, a masterfully crafted and frequently terrifying exploration of grief. Legendary critic Robert Ebert was among those who changed his opinion on the picture. After revisiting the film in 2002, he wrote, "Few films so successfully put us inside the mind of a man who is trying to reason his way free from mounting terror." Alfred Hitchcock made plenty of thrillers that have stood the test of time, but 1959's North by Northwest serves a different function in his personal history. It's still very much a thriller, sending Cary Grant staggering through a tangled web of crime, intrigue, and mistaken identity. But in its overall tone, it resembles an early action movie. North by Northwest was a blockbuster before blockbusters existed and paved the way for the James Bond films, so much so that Grant was approached to be the first Bond himself. North by Northwest has a stronger commitment to keeping things light and funny than many Hitchcock movies, but is no less suspenseful than his other thrillers. Unforgettable moments include Grant's character Roger Thornhill being attacked by a crop duster and chased across Mount Rushmore, making for some of the biggest moments of pure spectacle in the director's career. When a rainstorm forced Marion Crane to spend the night at the Bates Motel, horror movie history changed forever. Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho terrified theatergoers in 1960, largely thanks to Anthony Perkins' performance as a sadistic Norman Bates. Hitchcock directly challenged the censorship practices of the era with the film's vivid depictions of violence and sexuality, creating what some critics consider to be one of the first slasher movies.
We all go a little mad sometimes. Haven't you?
In the early days of public cinemas, patrons were allowed to enter and exit screenings at their leisure. With Psycho, Hitchcock demanded that no one was to be allowed in the theater once the film had already started, which drummed up publicity for the feature. The director didn't want to risk anyone missing his masterful bait and switch, in which the presumed protagonist of the film is murdered less than halfway through. The death scene itself, in which Marion is stabbed repeatedly in the shower, has been written about and referenced time and time again. In 2017, the documentary 7852 spent its entire runtime discussing and dissecting the iconic movie moment. Billy Wilder's film noir thriller Double Indemnity follows insurance salesman Walter Neff as he's approached by a beautiful woman who wants him to kill her husband so she can collect on his life insurance policy. The pair attempt to stage a fatal accident in order to increase their payouts, but things get complicated when Walter's boss becomes suspicious about the death and tries to prove that it was a murder.
Murder's never perfect. Always comes apart sooner or later. And when two people are involved, it's usually sooner.
Double Indemnity was a trailblazer in its genre, influencing many a filmmaker in the years and decades that followed its release. As master of suspense, Alfred Hitchcock once wrote, "Since Double Indemnity, the two most important words in motion pictures are Billy and Wilder." Unforgettable performances by Barbara Stanwyck and Fred MacMurray made Double Indemnity one of the most exciting thrillers and fiery romances of its era. Director Jack Smite remade it as a TV movie in 1973, but the newer version can't hold a candle to the near-perfect original. The Night of the Hunter, the directorial debut of Charles Laughton, went unappreciated when it first released, so much so that Laughton, who is better known as an actor, never directed a film again. Looking back on it now, it's hard to imagine how people failed to notice that it was one of the most well-shot and suspenseful movies of its time. The beating heart of The Night of the Hunter is Robert Mitchum, whose ghoulish Reverend Harry Powell is a singularly terrifying figure. He's a man whose religious delusions lead him to murder and deceit, yet his charisma allows him to hold everyone he meets in the palms of his hands that have love and hate tattooed across the knuckles. The only people immune to his manipulations are a young boy who knows the location of a $10,000 stash and an older woman who's dedicated her life to taking care of children in need.
It's a hard world for little things.
A classic battle between good and evil, The Night of the Hunter features some of the most stunning cinematography of the 1950s. If you think you don't like black and white movies, this one will probably change your mind. Lots of the most well-regarded thrillers out there were made by auteurs and filmmakers who exercise almost total creative control over their work. In contrast, Carol Reed's The Third Man, considered by critics to be one of the greatest British movies of all time, is very much a collaboration. It was produced by the legendary David O. Selznick and boasts a screenplay by the celebrated English novelist Graham Greene. It also benefits from a brilliant score by Austrian composer Atan Keras, which heavily features the zither. Above all, it's Reed's creative vision that drives the film. Unconventional angles and lighting uniquely capture the shattered streets of Vienna, the perfect backdrop for a story about an American author who gets sucked into Europe's seedy underbelly in the wake of World War II. The cherry on top is Orson Welles, who provides a historic performance as Harry Lime, one of cinema's greatest villains. He's presumed dead for most of the film until he finally makes his iconic entrance. One of Hitchcock's earlier efforts, The Lady Vanishes, is also one of the most historically important entries in the Master of Suspense's filmography. Incorporating numerous elements which would eventually become known as Hitchcockian, it specifically foreshadows North by Northwest as a spy thriller with strong comedic sensibilities that takes place, at least in part, on a moving train. As you might expect from the title, it follows an English tourist who discovers that one of her fellow travelers, an elderly woman, has disappeared, and no one she asks seems to remember seeing the lady at all. The commercial success of The Lady Vanishes launched Hitchcock's American career, as it caught the attention of producer David O. Selznick. Selznick subsequently drew Hitchcock across the Atlantic to make Rebecca, a crucial step in his road to becoming the filmmaker we remember today.
You're the most contemptible person I've ever met in all my life.
Well, confidentially, I think you're a bit of a stinker, too.
Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious certainly lives up to its name. Broadly considered to be a major turning point in Hitchcock's career, it's a spy thriller starring Cary Grant with plenty of romantic political intrigue. It reaches uniquely spectacular heights, weaving a tale of a post-World War II love triangle between two spies on opposite sides and the double agent they both love. Going over every cinematic innovation and scene in Notorious that went on to influence generations of future filmmakers would take far too long. Beyond those achievements, though, the winning essence of the film lies in the chemistry between performers, Hitchcock's groundbreaking direction, and a script by Ben Hecht that flawlessly builds a relationship between the three main characters. It also has one of cinema's best endings, with a final, brutally suspenseful sequence that concludes with the greatest possible payoff. Rear Window is yet another classic Hitchcock murder mystery, but the mystery here has nothing to do with the identity of the murderer. There's only one suspect, and the question is whether or not he did it at all, and if he did, whether or not it can actually be proven. Homebound due to a leg injury, photographer L.B. Jeffries spends his newfound free time spying on his neighbors, but voyeurism turns to investigation when he comes to suspect one of them of committing a murder. Can he crack the case without leaving his apartment, despite having his nurse and his girlfriend to help him? Doing so won't be easy. Most thriller protagonists have some degree of agency over the events of the film, but just like the audience, Jeffries is a helpless observer. Jimmy Stewart gives an unforgettable, paranoid performance as he tries to uncover the painful truth. Critics clearly love the thrillers of Alfred Hitchcock, but which one is their absolute favorite? According to the magazine Sight and Sound, which conducts a poll of the world's leading film critics every decade to determine the greatest movies ever made, that would be Vertigo. The nail-biting masterpiece dethroned Citizen Kane for a #1 spot on the list in 2012, as critics collectively declared it the best movie of all time. Hitchcock's final collaboration with star Jimmy Stewart, Vertigo is the pinnacle of his work and the themes of mistaken identity and the relationship between love and death. Stewart plays Scotty Ferguson, a former cop with a debilitating fear of heights who takes on a private case to follow a woman who's been behaving strangely. Spoiling this film for anyone who hasn't seen it should be a criminal offense, so we'll stop there. But needless to say, Vertigo is a must-watch movie for any thriller fan looking for some major suspense. Back in 1958, Touch of Evil was a critical and commercial failure, regarded as a mess of a film noir with a baffling plot that couldn't be saved by director and co-star Orson Welles' fancy cinematography. The film critics and audiences saw, however, was not the film Welles had intended them to see. Universal International heavily re-edited the movie prior to its release, to the extent that Welles felt the need to write a 58-page memo explaining what his version would have looked like. Welles was already notorious for fighting with studios over creative control, and Touch of Evil proved to be the last straw. It was the last film he directed in Hollywood.
What do you mean?
Your future is all used up.
Fortunately, critical regard for Touch of Evil grew in the decades that followed, and in 1998, the film was re-edited based on Welles' memo. Today, it's seen as an undisputed classic, a movie defined by its unparalleled visual flair, encapsulated most memorably in the 3-minute opening scene that unfolds via a single heart-pounding shot. Jules Dazin's Rififi, a French film noir that the American Dazin made after becoming a victim of the infamous Hollywood blacklist, is one of the original heist movies. That said, if you're looking for something with breakneck pacing and witty banter like Dog Day Afternoon or the Ocean movies, you'll probably want to look elsewhere. That's because Rififi is most notable for a 28-minute scene in which the four criminal protagonists chisel through a ceiling and drill into a safe, all in the absence of either music or dialogue. The total lack of any sound outside of the thieves' tools makes the whole affair incredibly suspenseful, even though it's hard to describe what happens without making it sound like a slog. Another interesting fact is that Rififi is an adaptation of a novel by Auguste Le Breton that Dazin absolutely hated. Tasked with adapting a book he detested, he decided to expand the novel's brief heist scene into that now legendary silent sequence that makes up a quarter of the film's runtime. This allowed Dazin to simply ignore large portions of the original story, and it only made the movie better. Battleship Potemkin is one of the first thrillers ever put to film. It was a government propaganda movie directed by Soviet filmmaker Sergei Eisenstein, which was commissioned specifically to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the 1905 Russian Revolution and the Potemkin Uprising. Aside from its political aims, Battleship Potemkin also clarified and ultimately embodied Eisenstein's trailblazing theories of montage and film editing. On both fronts, it was an unqualified success. Eisenstein used his editing techniques to create intense tension and laid the bedrock for the future of cinema. Countless critics owe their jobs to Eisenstein, as the medium would look a whole lot different nowadays if it wasn't for his trailblazing work. Even if you haven't actually watched Battleship Potemkin, you've definitely seen something that's directly referencing it. The legendary Odessa step sequence is one of the single most influential sequences in film history, and has been referenced in everything from The Godfather to The Revenge of the Sith.